More than 50 years ago, on a memorable day in April, specifically on the 6th of 1969, a group of friends set out for a fun holiday at the Kilsby Sinkhole in South Australia. What was supposed to be a fun holiday with some snorkeling, swimming, and a bit of diving took a horrific turn when two group members decided to go against their plan and do a deep dive inside the sinkhole without experience. So, what went wrong that day? Who were the divers involved? What mistakes did they make? And who was responsible for this incident? To answer all of these questions, watch the full video to the end and please subscribe to the channel. Let's uncover the horrifying reality of Kilsby Sinkhole, an extremely dangerous diving location. The Kilsby Sinkhole. Before moving on towards the incident, let us tell you about the infamous Kilsby Sinkhole. Present near the Mount Gambier of South Australia, this site is located on private property owned by a family since the 19th century. Now on paper, this site isn't considered much dangerous and was often used for the purpose of training, learning to dive, and simple recreational dives. According to various reports, the Kilsby Sinkhole on average gets about 1,000 visitors each year. It's quite popular in the diving industry because of its clear water and depth that's much lesser as compared to some other well-known diving sites, both factors contributing to the ease of diving at this location. But beneath this clear water lies an intricate and complicated network of twists and turns, which is more than enough to trap any diver if they get lost during their dive. In short, the Kilsby Sinkhole is a fairly safe, but as long as you remain close to the surface and don't dwell too deep into the cave. Background. On April 5th, 1969, Brett and Pat, who were both 18 years old, decided to visit the Kilsby Sinkhole. Now, both of these teenagers had no experience of diving, but were eager to try with their experienced diver friend named George. So, Brett, Pat, George, and another one of their friends named Kerry went into the sinkhole for a recreational dive. Impressively, both Brett and Pat went down to a depth of 50 feet without facing any trouble. Even after reaching the 50 feet depth, the duo wanted to go deeper, but had no return because George was having some issues with his ear. Both Brett and Pat, pretty motivated with their first effort, decided they'll go even deeper the next day. The dive. Next day on April 6th, 1969, the group arrived at the site again. This time, there were 10 friends, 3 of whom were experienced scuba divers, while the rest had no significant experience of diving. According to the plan, 4 members of the group would spend their day snorkeling in the water around the cave system, while Brett, Pat, and George would again dive with an intention to go deeper than they had gone the previous day. The rest will remain at the surface. Now, before setting their foot in water, both teenagers informed George that they intended to scratch off their names on the cave wall that was present at the depth of almost 196 feet. George, being the only experienced one of the trio, warned them against this plan and asked them not to go that deep, as they clearly lacked the training and equipment to do so. After taking some pictures of the surface, the group of 3 started their descent. Everything was going on normally, just as they had planned. Pat and Brett were ahead while George was a bit behind as he was taking pictures with his camera. After reaching the depth of 91 feet, the duo secured their safety line by tying it to a large boulder. Both of them, instead of continuing their descent, proceeded horizontally onto a large and complicated cave, which was present southwest of the entrance lake. After a few minutes, the safety line became tight as they had to move a bit further, thus the surfaced end of the line was released so they could pull it in behind them. On the other hand, George, according to the plan, had to follow the safety line, but he got a bit late as he was facing some issues in tying up his camera with the rope ladder. Now, by the time George solved this issue, had disappeared. This was the first out-of-plan thing to occur during the dive. With no other option, George decided to continue his descent without the line. By the time he reached a depth of 98 feet, everything around him was dark and he couldn't see any sign of his diving partners. However, in this dark and murky water around him, George was able to find the safety line still tied up to the boulder. At first, George thought the duo must be nearby, and once he sees them, they'll start their ascent together. But even after 5 more minutes of waiting, he could not see any light, bubbles, or any movement in the water, which meant that Brett and Pat weren't nearby. After seeing no signs, George became agitated and ascended to the surface, as he discussed his concerns with Carrie. After some discussion, it was decided that George, being the most experienced diver of the group, would dive again for as long as he could and try his best to locate the missing teenagers. Search for the missing divers. With terrifying thoughts in his mind, George once again descended into the water, hoping against hope to find the 2 boys alive and well. After reaching the boulder with safety line, he examined the line very carefully to catch even a bit of movement in it, but there was nothing of note. With his oxygen tank almost used up, he had no other option than to go back. But just when he was about to ascend, he saw a dim light coming from about 32 feet away. George gathered all of his strength and quickly started swimming toward the light. When he got a bit closer, he got sure that the light was coming from a torch, and the hopes of finding the duo alive got stronger. But when he reached the light, all of his hopes turned into a horrible reality. The light was indeed coming from a torch, but the diver it belonged to was lying lifelessly on his back at the bottom of the chamber. Just a few meters away, George saw the second diver. He too was dead, with his body motionlessly lying in the cave water. Rescuing the bodies. At this point, George was tired, horrified, and in shock. His hair was running low, and he knew that if he didn't act quick and make the ascent, then he would likely face the same consequences as the 2 dead divers. Without any delay, George went into the surface and informed everyone about what had happened. Now remember that this location was far from any settlement with proper assistance, and the divers present on site weren't experienced enough to get the bodies out. So the only way to help was to get out of the sinkhole and seek help. After some time, experienced divers arrived at the site, and took them more than 3 hours and multiple dives to rescue the dead bodies of Brett and Pat. Cause of death. When the rescue divers located the bodies, there were various signs that showed the possible final moments of the 2 divers. Both of them had their torches still on, and there were signs of struggle showing that they might have hastily tried to make it back to the surface, and thus using up the remaining air supply because of heavy breathing. The post-mortem reports of the coroner's office revealed that the major cause of death was air embolism, which occurred due to rapid decompression. This led to drowning, which ultimately caused the deaths of both divers. Who was responsible? In most of the diving incidents that we discuss, the deaths are caused by some unfortunate and unforeseen occurrences that happen in the depth. However, in this case, the 2 divers were themselves responsible for their deaths. As mentioned already, their ages were just 18 at this point, and up until Kilsby, they had never tried deep cave diving. They were extremely inexperienced, plus they lacked any of the adequate equipment that's used for diving at such sites. Secondly, after successfully completing their dive the first day, George warned them not to go into the dive again because of their lack of experience, training, and equipment that they ignored the advice. Third, and most important, they went off plan and without any past experience, went to explore the caves present in the sinkholes. These caves are complicated for even experienced divers, so obviously divers like Brett and Pat had increased probability to get in trouble while exploring them. This incident tells us the importance of having adequate experience and proper training before attempting underwater diving. When you are hundreds of feet beneath the surface, anything can go wrong at any minute, and at this point, having experience and equipment that you can rely on really helps. The Kilsby Sinkhole, on the other hand, continues to be a heavily visited diving site by divers from all over the world because of its crystal clear water and a comparatively safe nature. However, all of these divers are fairly warned to not go deep and make the same mistake as Pat and Brett.